Today we have Brian Murphy from the Machine Learning Department. He's going to tell us more.
Okay, yeah, thanks Layla. So yeah, I'm in the Machine Learning Department. I'm working with Tom on the Brain and Language project. And I work together with Layla and with Alana and Gus. And then we are also working partly with people from the NEL project, so with Partha, who is here somewhere. There he is, exactly. So, when Mladen asked me to maybe talk, I said, my first reaction was, I don't think I've got anything to say about machine learning. Because mostly we're interested, I suppose that the ultimate question we're interested in is really a psychological one. It's like, how does language work in your mind? But I think it presents quite a lot of interesting machine learning problems, and I'll show you how we're doing things at the moment, and then hopefully some people in this room will have ideas of how we might be able to do it even better with kind of other, to supplement this with other machine learning approaches. I wasn't sure how much to go into the background, and I figure I may as well kind of give a bit of background about what exactly we're measuring and what it means when we see patterns of activity in the brain, what that might mean and how close it is to the ground truth that we're after, which is, ultimately we'd love to be able to have an account of exactly how the brain functions, how individual neurons communicate with each other, what information they're holding, etc. But I'll give a little bit of background, then I'll introduce kind of the general methodology of trying to find a semantics in the brain, which Tom came up with and put out in his 2008 science paper, and then talk about how we're following on trying to improve upon that. I should make it clear, my background before this I was in a cognitive neuroscience center in the University of Trento, but before that I was a computational linguist, so I'm coming at it from more of a linguistics and cognitive science perspective. So a lot of the stuff we're working with is our models from computational linguistics. So I don't know how many people know what fMRI is. First of all, we have to understand what is being detected by fMRI. So we should know a little bit about brain architecture. Now this is a picture of the brain, or a 3D visualization of the brain where one of the two lobes has been taken off, so you can see the interior part. And these interior parts are the brain stem. They're the more primitive part of the brain, and they're mostly not of that much interest to us because talking about our group, are interested in higher cognition. And those primitive interior parts of the brain are the bits of the brain that we share, for example, with reptiles. The two larger lobes on the outside, that's where kind of thought happens, if we want to call it that. So that's generally what we're looking in when we're looking for interesting activity. As you can see, in terms of kind of the grand problem of trying to sort out what the whole brain is doing all the time, we're talking about 100 billion neurons, each which have their independent activity, and each of which have, on average, tens of thousands of connections. So it's an enormous, enormous problem to solve. We're not trying to solve it at that scale yet. Now just roughly, in terms of the brain, as I say, you've got two lobes. This is looking now from the left-hand side of the brain. And certain parts of the brain we understand very well. So we know, for example, the input from your ears arrives around here on the left-hand side. Well, okay, on both sides, but let's just not talk about the asymmetry yet. Arrives around here. So it's quite clear to us that the low-level acoustic processing happens, say, here-ish on both sides of the brain. Your optical nerves arrive at the back of the head, so we know that your visual processing happens there. All of the inputs and outputs to your body, so your sensory inputs and your outputs to try and move parts of your body, all happen along that strip that runs between the purple and the pink, the blue and the pink parts of the brain there. The sensory motor strip. So those parts of the brain we understand very well. After that it gets a bit hazy because you've got this chicken and egg problem, which is that we don't exactly know how you should characterize higher thought or psychology. But at the same time we're trying to discover the neural correlates of that. So we don't know exactly what we're looking for. So we're hoping that slowly looking for the neural correlates of what we assume is happening in the mind would inform what we believe is happening in the mind, and that could feed back into what we look for in terms of neural correlates. And because it's such a complex problem, I think machine learning is a really good approach. It's a really good data-driven approach. Now with functional fMRI, MRI stands for magnetic resonance imaging, and these are these machines that you have in hospitals that effectively are what have replaced, for many things, have replaced X-rays. So they're primarily used to have structural images of the body. One of their most important uses is structural images of meaning anatomical images of the brain, because obviously you like to avoid X-raying the brain if you can. They also give better images, so if, for example, you had some sort of brain injury or a suspected stroke or something, the first thing that would happen to you is you'd have an fMRI scan. Now it turns out that the same machine, if it's tuned differently, can also measure blood oxygenation levels. So, if you look at, I don't know how clear these two ones here are. I forgot, I should have brought a pointer or something. Maybe I'll use the mouse, will that work?
Yeah.
Can you see the mouse? Okay, yeah. So if you look at this small figure here, you'll see that this is showing the time course of blood oxygenation level at some different locations in the brain. So say we find a particular part of the brain which is sensitive, which is more active when people are processing visual scenes, say pictures of a field or the interior of a room or a picture of the Eiffel Tower, something like that. Say there was a piece of brain like that. If we put somebody in the fMRI scanner, we have an experimental paradigm where we show them different kinds of pictures. We would expect that that bit of the brain, if we showed them a picture of, say, a dog, might do what the blue line does, which it just sort of, in a bit of a noisy way, wobbles around a bit and doesn't do very much. Whereas if we showed a person a picture of, say, the Eiffel Tower, that part of the brain would become active for a while, would go up and then would go down after the picture disappeared. These two white lines here show when the picture appears, the stimulus appears, and the stimulus disappears. That's what you're measuring with fMRI. So you're finding a particular part of the brain that noisily changes its activity, well, okay, it's blood oxygenation level, in response to some particular cognitive function or mental state. Now, there are a lot of problems with this from the machine learning point of view. One is that, well, let's see, challenges, let's see. One is that the data is very noisy. So this kind of relatively clean line here is from an extremely high-strength scanner. Most people don't have 7 Tesla scanners. They've got 3 Tesla scanners. And you can see that the difference is much smaller there. It's also quite noisy. These are averaged over many presentations of the same kind of image. So if you looked at one single presentation, one single stimulus, you'd see a lot less. And also we have a very large number of these things. So depending on how finely you scan your brain, you're maybe looking at 10,000, 50,000 different data points. Most of which won't tell you anything interesting, most of which are going to be maybe irrelevant to what you're looking for. Let's see. Yes?
Is the point of that picture that 3 heads are better than 1?
Actually, that's an interesting question because they're usually.
Time course?
It's meant to be a time course. It's a schematic of a time course. But that's an interesting question. Yeah, another thing actually, I hadn't thought to mention this, but that comment brings it up, is that it's quite hard to learn from more than one person. So people's brains are actually surprisingly different in shape. And obviously you can kind of, if you get 2 people's brains, or images of 2 people's brains, you can kind of stretch them until they more or less overlap with a kind of standard atlas. And that works better than not doing it, but it doesn't work that well. So learning across more than one person, in fact, often doesn't win you much. If you're machine learning from one person's brain or 10 people's brains, often actually it doesn't help. Or let's see, let's put it this way. Say if you learn from one person's brain, train on a person's brain and test on the same brain, is usually about the same as, say, training on 10 people's brains and testing on an 11th person's brain, if you know what I mean. Okay, yeah, so here gives you, this might give you an idea of how noisy it is. So this larger image in the center is a nice anatomical image. So anatomical MRI images are really nice and clear, but the functional data is much messier. So this here is the functional data in the same in the same, let's see, from the same view. So I don't know if you can see here that that shape there, this part of the midbrain, is the same as corresponds to that. So it's got a much lower resolution, spatial resolution. It's more noisy. These are other images of the brain now cut through like this, like those blue lines. So this is looking from above. So just before we move on to doing this all with machine learning, let's just look at what people knew before we started using machine learning. Now, just to let you know, machine learning has recently become very important in neuroscience. So in the last 5 years, it's suddenly become very important, and people are finding out much more than they used to be able to do with the same sets of data. Because they've been using relatively kind of, how would you say, inflexible analytical paradigms, let's say. But anyway, on the old way of doing neuroscience, where people would say, show somebody, say, 100 images of animals and 100 images of, say, tools, they would more or less kind of average what the brain does for each category and then look at the difference. I mean, it was more clever than that, but in principle, that's what they were doing. And you could find out that there were, for example, here, these red areas would be areas that are more active on average when somebody's looking at a picture of an animal or maybe hearing a word that represents an animal. And the blue areas are areas that are more active when somebody's processing the meaning of a tool. These particular areas are just in the visual areas. So this is there about there. And remember that the visual input came in here. So this is thought to be, I mean, the story is that here at the very back, you're processing really low-level visual stuff like edge detection and shapes and colors and that sort of stuff. And then as you go along this part of the brain, you kind of incrementally extract higher and higher, let's see, more and more abstract representations of the information you're seeing until about here you kind of know that it's, say, a dog you're seeing. This is the idea. There's also, now people used to find things like this and say, okay, this here is, say, the animal area, this is the tool area, and see it in rather monolithic terms. Later people found, well, actually not that much later, because in 2001 already there was the first real machine learning study with fMRI, and they found, first of all, they found more interesting things like there were particular patterns which corresponded to shoes or seats or faces or houses. So they could tell these different categories apart by learning a pattern of neural activations. And another thing they found out was that these areas overlapped. So kind of the so-called animal area, also the pattern of let's see, activations within the so-called animal area, in fact, could tell you quite a lot about whether something was a tool as well. And not only in negative terms. So let's see, the animal area could tell you whether you're looking at a shoe or a seat, which indicates that it's not really an animal area. And there's been another neat thing that people found out more recently, which is that, let's see, coming from kind of I suppose the cognitive science, AI, and tradition, the linguistic tradition, the philosophical tradition, people tended to think of meaning in rather abstract symbolic terms. Now there's been sort of a backlash, as it were, of people who've got more embodied views of meaning. And they're saying, well, it's more important of kind of, in knowing like what a cup is, it's not that you've got kind of an abstract representation of the shape and you've got kind of the idea that it is for drinking, which is for nutrition, but rather maybe your more important, let's see, knowledge of it is how you hold it, how you lift it to your mouth, you know, the sensation of having it on your lips, etc. So this really, really neat study, it's not a machine learning study, but a really neat study by Pulvermuller in Cambridge, where he found that first of all, I think I mentioned there that these strips on your brain are the ones that receive input and send, let's see, control outputs to your body. And they've got a particular arrangement that, let's see, the left-hand side of your brain feels and directs the right-hand side of your body, and the right-hand side of your brain feels and directs the left-hand side of your body. And then starting at the top of this strip is the input and output to the lower parts of your body, and it goes down then to the upper parts of your body. So for example, down here I'd feel and wiggle my toes, or sorry, up here, excuse me, and down here I would say feel and move my lips. And then somewhere in the middle are your hands. So this is a nice little study where he showed first that those blue areas at the top of the strip, so this is a view from above, are for foot movements, and then here are finger movements, and then here are tongue movements. And then he found that if somebody was passively listening to, so they had to do some other distractor task, I can't remember what it was, and they were having words played to them, if they were passively listening to leg-related words, the same kind of leg bit of the brain, leg controlling and feeding bit of the brain lit up. And if they're listening to arm-related words, or let's see, arm action-related words, the hand or arm bit would activate, and then face-related words, let's say the mouth bit. So I think the words were like, well, let's see, the example words were, say, pick. Pick would be an arm-related one, like pick up. Lick would be a mouth one, and kick would be a foot one, right? So it seems here like you've got meaning is more distributed. So I think previously people hoped that they'd find one bit of the brain that just encoded all the semantics. This suggests it might be more spread about. Now, I think it's still an open question how much this is true or how much it's kind of an artifact of the experiment. It may be that after I present you the word kick, you start thinking of the last time you kicked something and you visualize that, and that's what we're detecting. It's possible. It's not necessarily the case. We're not sure. But from our perspective, what it means is we have to look everywhere. So when we're trying to find the semantics in the brain, we can't just say, okay, we're going to look in area X. We just have to we've got a completely open book, which again means that a data-driven machine learning approach could be a good one. Now again, let's see, where did I put this in? Oh yeah, exactly. So as a result, when we're machine learning on this sort of data, we have to worry about feature selection because you've got tens of thousands of voxels. Most of them are completely irrelevant. We also have to worry about noise. We also have to worry about high dimensionality in general, because you still may be talking about after your feature selection of thousands of dimensions, which are noisy and everything. And a big one is redundancy. So I think I mentioned in an earlier slide that the inherent dimensionality of the data is of the order of several millimeters, because you don't have a different vein supplying every different neuron, right? Your parts of your cardiovascular system supply groups of neurons, and they're on the scale of 1 to 5 millimeters. That means, and also looking back at this picture, that means that the information encoded in the very, say, center of this blob is probably quite, on say animalness, is quite similar to the one, a couple of voxels over. So you have large numbers of voxels that tell you almost exactly the same thing. So you've got a load of collinearity and redundancy. Sorry, I forgot to say a voxel. Did I explain what a voxel is? A voxel is a 3D pixel in the brain. So when we're talking about the pixels in these images, we call them a voxel because it's a volume pixel. Okay? They may be kind of the order of 1 millimeter cubed to, say, 4 millimeters cubed, depending. Okay, how am I doing for time? Not too bad. Okay, so so this was kind of the old style, as it were, is you say, okay, we've got different kind of gross categories of semantic kinds, like they're living things and non-living things, or things that you do with your arm versus things you do with your legs. But semantics is much more complicated about that, and we know much more than just some things are animals and some things are not animals. We've got much more specific knowledge about it. And also, we probably need to have some sort of componential semantics. So apart from just knowing that a dog is a dog, I know that a dog, I can recognize dogs, but I can also say dogs are more like cats than they are like avocados, right? Now, how can I do that? I obviously must have some representation of dog that I can break down in some sense to be able to make those similarity judgments, I think, yeah? So what is this semantics? And so I'm going to start by talking about this paper that Tom did in 2008 of how he showed how you could, for the first time, discover the bits of semantic, the parts of semantics, the features, like in machine learning terms, the latent dimensions underlying these different concepts. So first I'll start with kind of a schematic, sort of toy version of it, and then I'll show you the real thing. So imagine, to make things simple, let's imagine that we think semantics is made up of whether something is living or not, moving or not, and big or not, right? So a living, moving, big thing would be a cow, and a non-living, non-moving, non-big thing, small thing would be, say, a pebble, right? Now, one thing we know we could do already is we could measure the brain activity for cow. That's not hard. You put somebody in a scanner, you ask them to look at loads of pictures of cows or to read the word cow or whatever. And this is, again, just in terms of what you're looking at, this is a view of a slice like that through the brain that goes kind of This at the back are the visual areas where the visual input comes in, and then that path down which things start to get analyzed is kind of going down here, down through the temporal lobes. So say this is what cow looks like. What we'd like to be able to do is break it into kind of what the brain, the bit of the brain activity due to it being living, the bit of it due to it being moving, the bit of it due to it being big, right? That would be nice, right? This isn't it. So the question is, how do you do that? And one way you could do it is you could show the person loads of different things. So if you show them a load of different concepts, you could then make a comparison between what the brain does for living things like cow, cat, elephant, and non-living things like phone and skateboard, and so on, right? So you could use that method. You could use some sort of subtractive analysis or something to get, averaging and subtract average all the living ones, average all the non-living ones, subtract them, and you'd have something like the top left thing, you would hope, right? And that's nice, first of all, but the really powerful thing about it, and the reason people were really excited about this article that Tom wrote, was because it allows you to extrapolate. So until then, people could only say something about things that you would present to the person in the experiment. In one of these experiments, somebody's lying in a scanner for an hour, usually, or up to an hour. After an hour, it gets a bit uncomfortable. It's also has anyone done an fMRI? I don't know, yeah, exactly. So some people my feeling is it's like being inside a fax machine, or something goes, there's all these, because there are like big coils. There are big coils through which an alternating current is being sent, well, let's see, an oscillating current, sorry, in a very high field standing magnetic field. So it vibrates. So it's not so nice, it's also very unnatural, let's say. But anyway, you can only do it for a while, and you can only present so many stimuli. So typically in these experiments, we can show people, say, 50, maybe if you're lucky, 100 concepts in a single experiment. Even that's pushing it. And I don't know if you know, but like a typical university-educated adult knows, depending on your definition, between 20 and 50,000 words. So we know a lot, right? And we're only looking at 50, 100 in these experiments. So the really nice thing about this is it allows you to extrapolate, because if, for example, I hadn't presented helicopter to the person in the experiment, I could say, well, helicopters are not living, they are big and they are moving, so I think the brain should do this for a helicopter by just a linear combination of those, let's see, an average, let's say, of those three images at the top. Is that clear? So, so this is exactly what Tom did in his paper. Now he used a different, and I think a better model of semantics than the toy one I just outlined, but still a very simple one. So all Tom measured was, on the semantic side, was he said, how often do each of the concepts we're interested in appear near one of 25 verbs in the Google Ngram corpus? And these verbs were chosen with this idea of embodiment in mind. So things like touch, eat, feel, taste, kick, hear, and so on. So the idea is, for example, that edible things should appear near eat more often than non-edible things, and so on. Things that make it have a distinctive sound would appear near hear more often than things that don't, and so on. So he made this simple model of each of 60 words. So there are 60 words in 12 categories. They're listed there, but they're kind of living and non-living, sort of concrete, everyday things, let's say. He chose 100 voxels out of tens of thousands. This is by a stability feature selection. So how stable was, right, okay, I should say this. Each of the concepts, say like celery, was presented 6 times. And if you've got a good voxel, a voxel which is an informative feature for this sort of learning, its activity over the 6 presentations of celery should be more or less the same, and its activity over the 6 presentations of dog should be more or less the same, and so on, right? So we use this sort of a stability measure for the feature selection. And by doing this, he got, and then you have to do some machine learning, right? So it's really simple machine learning. What you do is you treat, for each voxel, so each of these 100 voxels, which we've decided are informative for conceptual differences, you line up the 60 concepts. These are different concepts, which I chose for illustrative purposes, but 60 concepts, You line up the voxel activity, so the blood oxygenation level in that bit of brain, which we hope correlates with degree of neural activity. And then you put the features in here, the learned features from a corpus, from the Google Ngram corpus, of how strongly associated, say, bat is with the verb see or the verb hear or the verb taste, and so on. And then you just have to learn the betas. You know what I mean? So it's just a linear regression. It's a really simple linear regression. Here it's particularly simple because we've got 60 rows and 25 columns, so you don't even need to regularize. And you do that over and over again. You do that. So for each, this is on single participants. For each participant and each of their 100 voxels that we've selected, you build a model like this. Yeah?
So you picked 100 stable voxels, but how did you pick the slice to begin with?
We didn't. The slice is just there. Oh, sorry. How do we choose which bits of the brain to scan?
Yeah, so it's one of the slices, right? Because it's a 3D scan, right?
Yeah, we didn't. We didn't. Once you've got the data, we just said choose them from whichever slice suits you, whichever slice is most informative. So I think these pictures, I'd have to ask Tom, but I imagine these pictures he probably produced using a much higher. He probably used much more than 100 voxels for these pictures because you just see some dots and mostly black. Is that clear? Yeah, so it's kind of, the images are kind of misleading in that sense. So you just have to learn this, and this will tell you, for example, like kind of what you hope would happen is you might find that for a particular voxel, say in the bit of the brain to do with eating and tasting and stuff, that voxel might tell you very little about seeing and hearing, and all these betas might be 0, but you might get a big beta here, and therefore learn that voxel X is to do with eating and voxel Y is to do with hearing, and so on. Right? And then after doing this, the results are, I don't know if the results are good. I think they're good, but then again, since nobody had done it before, it's hard to tell what good means. The evaluation is leave 2 out. So we've got 60 concepts. You train on 58. You leave the other 2 out. You take the corpus semantic characterization of the meaning of each of those left out words, which in this case are celery and airplane. You use them and your learned voxel models to predict what the brain would do for celery and airplane, which this particular machine learning algorithm hasn't seen that time. And then you compare it to the real observed activity for celery and airplane. And it should be the case that they're more similar to each other than, let's see, that the 2 celery ones predicted and observed and the 2 airplane ones are more similar to each other than similar kind of crossways, right? Should be the case that this is more like that and this is more like that than by crossing them. Okay? And so chance would be 50%, and he got 77 or 78, 77 point something, I can't remember. Just an important kind of side note is that it, like what I said about that modality experiment where you've got kicking and kick, lick, pick. Many people said, has this got anything to do with semantics? It might be to do with visualization, or it could be to do with, maybe people are putting a picture in their head and we're actually detecting visual characteristics as opposed to semantics. There are many other sort of interpretations. It turns out this works pretty well across different people, pretty well across different modalities, meaning if you showed someone a picture and trained on their data, you could decode the activity when somebody was reading words instead. And it even works across languages. So I think they've done some work where they've compared Portuguese speakers and English speakers. And there are it's not completely stable, but there's a lot more commonality than you would expect by chance. So it does appear that it's actually semantics. Okay, so any questions about that up until now? That's kind of the framework. And I'll get to the new stuff, which we're doing right now. Okay, so from now on, I'm just going to talk about what would be your best model of neurosemantics. So in general, we've got stimulus words, some set of stimulus words. We've got a set of brain images corresponding to those stimulus words. And the question is, what's the best intermediate modeling of the meaning of those words? Now, Tom's model worked very well, but I don't think he would claim that you could characterize the meaning of all words in our vocabulary by their co-occurrence with 25 verbs, right? That's not a realistic model of meaning. It's very effective, but not comprehensive, let's say. So in some way, that's sort of hand-tailored. So it's automatic that it comes from the Ngram corpus, but it's hand-tailored in that you have to choose a particular set of co-occurrence words by hand which you think will suit the concept words you're trying to describe. Another kind of hand, somewhat manual, oh sorry, I didn't realize this, click on the sign. How do I get rid of that? That's annoying. I go away? Yeah, okay. Another really successful kind of semi-manual method that was tried was by Mark Palatucci, and he was also at the department together with Dean Pomerleau and Tom and probably some other people. And what they had another idea. They said, okay, instead of using these 25 verbs, let's ask people. So they crowdsourced it. They got it from Mechanical Turk by asking people a series of 218 questions about these same 60 words and some others, which I won't talk about today. Like, is it an animal? Can you hold it in one hand? Is it easy to lift up? I don't know. Is it wild? Does it stand on two legs? A whole load of things that they thought were sort of, again, kind of in, it was a mix of things. Some things were kind of topical things, like, you know, is it to do with the household? Some things were clearly categorical things, like, is it man-made or animal? Other things were embodied things, like, is it something that's easy to pick up? You know, is it bigger than a microwave oven? A whole load of questions. Now, using this this model of 218 semantic features instead of the 25, they got somewhat better, so 81%. And they also tried at the same time. They said, okay, it's kind of funny choosing just 25 verbs off the top of your head, which is what Tom did. He actually told me he did it in his hotel room one night before a concert, which is great. Sorry, before a talk. And so they said, let's just let the corpus decide. So they took some, now I'm not sure, I forgot the details of exactly what Mark Palatucci did, but he tried taking, say, 5,000 corpus words, common corpus words, and saying co-occurrence with them, and that worked actually quite a bit worse than what's it called, that Tom's, I sometimes think I should start calling Tom Plato, because Plato kind of thought, I know kind of the shape of reality, and I'm just going to write it down. It seems like Tom kind of succeeded somewhat in doing that with his 25 verbs. Anyway, so this is an alternative. Now, this is also great now because it uses crowdsourcing, so you get somebody else to do the work for you, and it's cheap and it's fast. But the disadvantage is you have to choose the 218 questions, and these 218 questions work very well for these sorts of concepts, but I'd be skeptical whether they'd work very well for a word like quantum theory, because you can't pick up and hold or talk about the size of quantum theory. So or for verbs, for that matter, or adjectives. So it doesn't seem to be a completely general solution for the human lexicon, human vocabulary. Just by the by, again, a neat thing that Mark Palatucci did here was he showed that he could not only tell whether something was a particular concept, which is what we'd done before, but also guess from a brain image what its rating on these different scales was. So he kind of like take a guess of the size of something by looking at its brain image, which is nice, or its, you know, its edibility or things like that. I know, can anyone read that? Probably not, but I'll just tell you anyway. This is an isomap. So, oh right, I've got two pointers. Oops. Right, this is isomap, so it's like a multi-dimensional scaling. So you take that space of 218 questions, and you squish it down to 2 dimensions where the mutual distance between all the pairs of data points are kind of maximally preserved. And you can see that with these 218 questions, it does nice things like, you know, putting all the vegetables together, putting all the insects together, putting the body parts together, nearly, except for leg, animals together. It's also neat that it's got like I don't know if you can see this, but it seems to have it seems to have decided that the 2 principal dimensions are natural versus living versus non-living and size. So there's small things at the top and big things at the bottom, and living things over here and non-living things over there. That's kind of niche, it just folds out with the data. But I mean, again, these are only 2, we're forcing it to express it in terms of 2 dimensions. There's probably other interesting variation there too. So the question now is, can we do better than this in a completely automatic fashion from a corpus? And that's what I've been trying to do just recently. And I've got 15 minutes to talk about it. Okay, so corpus semantic models. I guess there are probably people here from LTI as well who probably know what a corpus semantic model is. And I guess, in fact, okay, most people have probably heard of topic models or LSA. The general idea that unifies all these models is that words that mean similar things will appear in similar contexts. So a word like car and a word like automobile appear in very, very similar subsets of documents. So if you collected a load of documents, say from Wikipedia, and saw, you'd probably find that car and automobile tend to appear in the same sorts of documents, and you'd also find that car and automobile tend to appear in the same positions in the same sorts of sentences, because they mean more or less exactly the same thing. This is the intuition lying behind corpus models, and as I just indicated, there are two rather different ways of looking at it. One is word document co-occurrence. Do things appear in the same sort of document? Another one is word, let's see, colloquy co-occurrence. Do they appear in the same parts of the same sorts of sentences? And those two things give you slightly different answers. So, well, let's see. Yeah, so here are some, okay, HAL is a word colloquy style one. And with that one, you tend to get, you can see here, in fact, the nearest neighbors of tiger are elephant, gorilla, lion, shark, etc. Motorcycle, motor, wheeler, driver, insurance, and so on. The difference between these two different models is nobody has a great handle on it, but the idea, at least, is that with a word colloquy model, you get things which are of the same semantic type, and with a word document model, you get things that are in the same topic. So to give an example, a word document model might find that the near collocates of judge are legislation, court, prison, and things like that. The near collocates of, the near neighbors of the word judge in a word colloquy level might be things like coach, referee, things like that, which are of the same semantic type, but maybe in different topical domains. Okay. You can also, they're very simple ones where you just count, okay, what words appear within, say, 4 words left or right, or do they appear in the same document or not? You can also, there are also much more elaborate ones where you say use a dependency parse, the fact that, you know, policeman has a certain propensity to appear as a subject of kill, and so on and so forth. So there are different amounts of kind of linguistic intelligence you can try and plug into these models. And these are the ones I looked at in the studies, so the results I'm going to show you. So I started with a straight up document model, like you just described, like LSA, a straight up word form model, like HAL. The same thing but stemmed, so taking, first of all, in the word form model, I took all words, including punctuation, all tokens, in fact. With the stemmed one, I reduced them to a stem, like a Porter stemmer, so it should be, you know, different word variants like run, running, runner would all reduce to run. Directional one is the same as word form, except I differentiate between whether the word was seen on the left or the right. Part of speech, I differentiate by part of speech, is it a noun or a verb? Sequence, you look for word sequences up to length 4 left or right. So any subsequences of 1, 2, 3 or 4 words to the left, or subsequences of 1, 2, 3, 4 words to the right. And then dependency, a full mult parse, dependency parse of the same corpus. Okay? So these are, okay, the first one is document. The two interesting differentiations are the first one, document, versus all the rest, which are kind of things that appear in the same sentence. And then the rest are kind of increasing amounts of sort of a linguistic knowledge. Like the first one, word form, is really dumb, because obviously people don't think of words just in terms of the word form. They connect run to running and runner and all of those things. And then I used, so I could compare these different sorts of basic data. I used kind of a common pre-processing pipeline where we used, okay, first of all, we used a very large corpus, at least compared to previous work of this kind. We used the 16 billion words part of ClueWeb, which has been used for a few different things in the department. I think it's about 500 million sentences, is that right? Yeah, 50 million documents. We used a frequency cutoff of 20 or 50, we tried both. In terms of anything that appeared less than 20 times, we just threw away. Any co-occurrence of word plus its feature, co-occurrence feature. We used point-wise mutual information, or positive point-wise mutual information, to normalize. So it's not very interesting, for example, that man appears near the a lot, right? Because man is incredibly frequent and the is incredibly frequent. So you want to normalize down these frequencies based on the marginal frequencies. So how surprising is it that man appears the, not very? How surprising is it that judge appears near Judy is very, right? Because Judy and judge are not that common compared relative to, you know, by chance you would expect them to appear near each other with a certain frequency based on their independent probabilities, but they appear much more frequently together. So PMI is a thing that will give you a high value for, say, Judge Judy, and a low value, negative value for the man or something like that. And then we SVD'd it. So we hit it with an SVD hammer. So, when in doubt, use SVD was kind of the thing. But it has been used a lot before. And importantly, we wanted to use something that would allow us to compare these different sorts of data, because if we look in terms of dimensionality, let's see, the word form one is 40,000 words of interest. We wanted to learn, well, I'll tell you about it in a second, whatever our words of interest are by about 500,000 dimensions. So the 500,000 things they appeared near. The document one is by 50 million dimensions. So it's what is that? 2 orders of magnitude larger. So there's a large difference in the dimensionality of the data, and we hope that by SVD in it, we would make them more or less comparable. Another reason to do that is because you've got big problems. One of the most glaring deficiencies of these, or let's see, weak points of these corpus models is polysemy and synonymy. So, car means the same thing as automobile, but the model doesn't, at least in advance, know that something appearing near car means the same thing as it appearing near automobile. And then bank means different things. So it doesn't know the difference between appearing near bank in financial bank context and a bank of the river context. So what you hope SVD will do is kind of squish together different co-occurrence features that mean the same thing and kind of separate ones that don't mean the same thing. This is the hope. I mean, it seems to work as well. The data is huge, so we had to use some tricks like multiplying the matrix by its transpose to make it smaller and SVDing that, and using Python sparse SVD, and also for the really big one, we're using GenSim, which is a Python package, and GraphLab. We're trying to use both to do the really big, 50 million document, what's called SVD. One other thing is a vocabulary. So if you're trying to learn all these dimensions, these latent dimensions, you want to have more than 60 words. It's not very much to learn over. So we've got 40,000 words, 40,000 rows, which represent kind of an average kind of adult vocabulary, roughly. So an approximation of the size of an adult vocabulary. Then the machine learning, so it's very similar to what we did before. We did some averaging of the fMRI data to improve its signal to noise ratio. We took 500 instead of 100 voxels, but the same feature selection. We again trained a model for each voxel and trained it on 58 concepts by however many semantic features we had. And then we used now to regularize linear regression with a cheap way of estimating the best lambda. And then, so again, on exactly the same evaluation as this, so comparing the predicted and the observed, which, okay, state of the art is, say, about 70, high 70s, low 80s, let's say. We got very slightly better, but not enormously better results. So the best we got was 83% from the dependency model, by using 1,000 SVD dimensions and a frequency cutoff of 20. But with a much kind of cheaper, computationally cheaper model of only 300 dimensions and a cutoff of 50, so you're throwing away much more stuff in advance, we get almost exactly the same value. And then another interesting thing is this one here, which is the direction. So just taking the raw tokens and remembering whether they appeared on the left or the right gives you something very, very similar to the dependency as well. Which kind of makes sense, because if you think of kind of appearing in a small window to the left of a verb is going to give you quite similar information to having recorded that something as a subject to the verb, if we're talking about this set of concrete nouns. Similarly, appearing to the right of an adjective, or is it, oh no, sorry, the left of an adjective is like having that, sorry, no, to the right of an adjective is having that adjective as a modifier, which is the sort of information a dependency parser would tell you.
The co-occurrences were 5-man co-occurrences or co-occurrence within a 5-man?
Within a window of plus minus 4 tokens. In the case of those co-occurrences, dependencies then have a scope of the sentence. So it seems kind of nice. The kind of confusing thing, though, I mean, when I started doing this work, I was hoping to see a big difference between dependence, say the linguistic, let's see, the dependent styled ones and the word form style ones and the document ones. So I said, okay, both of these do quite well, but they probably tell me slightly different things. Let's try plugging them together and see if the whole set works better. And it doesn't. It gives you more or less, I don't have the figures here right now, but it gives you more or less exactly the same values. So two kind of puzzles this presents is, okay, are all of these different models in fact telling you more or less exactly the same thing? You know, are they just kind of different? Because remember, we are looking at kind of latent variables underlying co-occurrences. So maybe they're in fact just different ways of getting at exactly the same truth. This next slide suggests that they're not. So this is where I said, I tried to evaluate the degree of overlap between two sets. So I said, you know, to what extent can you fit, so I used regression, kind of stepwise regression, to what extent can I fit, say, the word form model on the basis of the dependency model, or vice versa? Or to see it another way, what proportion of the information contained in the dependency model is included in the word form model and the converse? And you can see, okay, first of all, you can see things like, okay, red means very similar, that the word form model, the one plus direction and part of speech are all almost exactly the same thing. You can also see things that make kind of sense, which is that of the three of these, the one which is most similar to dependencies is the directional one. And let's see, any other interesting things? And oh yeah, and that the document one is really very different from the rest. So the document, sorry, these values are in R squared, so only let's see, what's this? Probably about kind of 40% of the data. Let's see, 40% of the data in the, let's see, where are we going? Yeah, well, less, let's see. Less than 30% of the information encoded in the dependency model are also contained in the document model. And over here, if we look across the way, and a similar amount in the opposite direction. So about 30% of the information in the document model are encoded also in the dependency model. Another question is, and okay, why could it be the case then? How can it be the case that we get the same performance here, but it's quite different data that we're learning off? Okay, one thing is that most of these dimensions are not relevant, and it's only using like a small subset.
Can you explain again, what does it mean that you can predict one model from the other?
How did I do it? Okay, I'm running out of time. Will I maybe go over that in the extra time or something? Yeah, exactly, because people are already getting restless. Okay, the idea I have at the moment is that we've got a very small set of 60 concepts in 12 categories, and in fact those 12 categories can be told apart by taxonomic differences, like they're living or animate or whatever, but also by topical differences. So if you think of the set of vehicles, which is one of our categories, we've got 5 different vehicles, you could either say they're different because they're vehicles or they're different because they're in the transportation domain, right? And there's a paper here from Francisco Pereira that shows that using a topic model, a Wikipedia topic model, in fact each of the categories does have more or less almost a unique topic to go with it. Not all of them, but you can do a pretty good job of just telling the categories apart, independent of the brain data, just in the corpus data, on the basis of their topics. So what do we want to do next? Let's see, so we want more data. So we should use other recording modalities like EEG and MEG. There are other brain recording imaging technologies. We definitely want more words, more than 60 words, and we'd like to have them in other syntactic categories, not just nouns. Also say more abstract words of very different semantic kinds. It'd be nice to have a much more subtle approach to this, the SVD hammer. So, you know, LDA is something we're starting to try now, or network regularization, or if anyone's got any ideas, I'd love to hear them, of nice ways of recognizing the hidden dimensions of the corpus models that make them easily interpretable, because SVD works quite well, but it's very crude and it's really hard to interpret the dimensions that come out. So if anyone's got any cool ideas for that, I'd love to hear them. And also what we'd like to do is we'd like to integrate the data from the other, or make use of these other data sets, like the 218 properties, or like, for example, the information in NEL. So we've got NEL, we've got all this really, you know, distilled, detailed information about concepts from NEL, from the Never Ending Language Learning, the Read the Web project. But it's very hard for us to use because it's so particular. It's so specific to the concept. So you can also think of, you've got a similar problem with feature norms, psychological feature norms. This is where you get people, say in a lecture hall, to say, write down the features of dog, and people write down it barks and chases cats, etc. That's really good specific information. It's alike the information in NEL, but the problem is, from a learning point of view, nothing barks except for a dog. So if you leave dog out of your analysis to test dog, you can't learn about barking, you know what I mean? So I don't know if anyone's got any good ideas about how to learn on these very sparse, kind of almost non-overlapping data sets. Like maybe it's impossible, I'm not sure. But again, if somebody's got an idea, I'd love to hear it. And what we'd really love to do then is put all this together. So at the moment we're learning from one particular kind of corpus semantic or other semantic characterization and one single participant in one single recording modality at a time. But they're all alternative views on the same reality, we hope. Assuming that, you know, all the people in the room have a mostly similar representation of the meaning of dog. And that I should see a similar thing if I put you in an EEG scanner, an MEG scanner, or an fMRI scanner. And we're also starting to look beyond single words, but I don't have time to talk about that now. And then this is the final slide. Is kind of like a why bother? You know, why do we do this at all? I mean, I think it's already working quite well. But the question is, you know, could we could you do brain dictation for this sort of thing? You know, could you? There's this classic problem of people. It's a very rare problem, thankfully, of people who are locked in due to not being able to move their facial muscles or any of their muscles at all. It seems that there are some people who are completely conscious but cannot express themselves at all and can hear everything but can't express themselves. So could you help people like that? Could we say with WordNet, could I, after scanning 100 people and using some clever models, just download WordNet from your brains? Do you know what I mean? Could we find the inherent organization of the lexicon, just download it rather than guessing, because that's what ontologists do. I mean, and linguists, we make educated guesses, but they're still guesses. Could we do neural parsing? So could you have somebody with an EEG headset on and kind of read off the process of them understanding a sentence? Then there are also some other ideas we have so I've just started a project where we're going to try a clinical application where we're going to use technologies like this, or EEG technologies, not fMRI, for trying to diagnose aphasia. So there are different sorts of language deficits you get from brain damage, and see if you can tell what's wrong with somebody's language system rather than just that there is something wrong with their language system. And I think that's everything. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sorry, that should say, and thanks to, I forgot to put in Partha and Tom and Layla and Gus and Alana, who a lot of this work is with. Yeah, thanks.
With the dimension, you couple with dimension and dimensionality by writing the two optimizing both at the same time. So that because right now what you're doing is sort of
kind of dumb. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So Tom has a framework he's working on that would allow you to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't have any results for this sort of data in this task. I don't have any results yet. We haven't run it yet. Yeah.
The topics you get would be pretty.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Cool.
So I have a question now. You started off with saying that we don't have a lot of intuition what's going in the mind. Now we try to this data-driven approach to figure out something to inform our intuition what's going on. But then you finally concluded by saying we have particular applications like reading the brain, controlling devices, etc. So is learning about semantics, like how we represent different things, does this help us from understanding how mind works actually, or it's more like?
I hope so. I mean, I think that we don't know yet. We don't know. I mean, these are the technologies that will hopefully answer those questions. We don't know yet. I mean, it'd be possible that these technologies could work. We never gain much of a psychological insight, but they still turn out to be useful. That's possible.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm just kind of I'm not sure what kind of insights do people gain from understanding that this part of the brain controls.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah. Well, okay, think of it this way. If, say it were the case that, and people do argue about whether semantics is more kind of topic-driven or more taxonomically driven. Okay. So if we found over a much larger group of words, the document model worked better than the dependency model or vice versa, then you could say, okay, it seems like topical organization is the dominant organization in the mind. Okay. Or people have also said that taxonomic organization is more important for concrete concepts, and topical organization is more, and this is more plausible, more important for abstract concepts. So you might find that the document model works better for abstract, and the other ones work better for concrete because it's hard to talk about an abstract concept and say what size of it. It's hard to think of taxonomic properties. It's hard even to decide what the taxonomy is for abstract things, like whether something is an attribute or a property. And if you look at that part of WordNet, for example, it's a complete mess because people can't really agree how you should, what the natural categories of abstract concepts are. But that's the sort of thing. Yeah, I mean, we're writing a paper right now on that, back with the guys in Trento, on whether topical, or my previous university, whether topical or taxonomic organization tells you more about abstract concepts. But I haven't run this model over that data yet.
So how fine can you make the categories that you're trying to learn using this fMRI? Like, for example, let's say your category was, is it a building or not? But then you wanted to make that finer, like is it tall, is it a stadium, or
Oh yeah, it works. I mean, it works. It works less well, but it works. I'm trying to remember these figures. Where's it gone? Okay, this shows that you can tell things like, is it big or small? You can tell those individual facts about individual concepts, the work that Mark did. And then on this figure of Tom's, he did also separate up this number and say, obviously it's much easier if things are in very different categories, right? But he did have a figure for, I think it was something like 90% correct if things are in different categories, and something like high 60s if they're in the same category. So it's still much more often than you'd expect by chance. So you can tell stadium apart from apartment building more often than you'd expect by chance.
But I mean, there's got to be some limit to that using fMRI, right? Or would you say?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, there's always going to be an error, right? I imagine, or let's say there's always going to be noise, which is going to lead to errors until you have enough data. Let's see. It could also be this is an important kind of follow-on slide. So yeah, we don't know the limits. Is the short answer, and we have to remember what we're recording. So when we're recording these voxels, we're recording hundreds to millions of neurons at a time, right? Noisily. And there's a really nice paper. Has anyone heard of the Jennifer Aniston neuron? Yeah, it's this. So there was some guys. So these guys, Quiroga and colleagues in 2005. This is where they're recording single neurons. So this is pre-surgical. So it doesn't happen very often, obviously. If somebody's going to go into surgery, into brain surgery, you have to know if they're an epileptic. Some people go in because they've got like such severe epilepsy that they can't have a daily life, a normal life. So sometimes people before that surgery, they'll put either electrodes just laying on the outside of the brain. They'll open the skull and put electrodes on the outside of the brain, or sometimes stick electrodes into the brain and try and use triangulation to work out where the source of the epileptic fits is, and then cut that out. Or another thing they do is if, say, you're cutting out a tumor or something, they'll do pre-surgical mapping to work out where, for example, which bit of your brain exactly, what the limits are, the bit of your brain that you use to control your right hand. Because say the tumor is near your hand area, you want to minimize the chance that you're going to disable that person's right hand, right? You say they're right-handed, yeah? So in these sorts of situations, you can get a whole other kind of data, and a much higher quality data. And in an experiment like this, they took some electrodes, and you stick the electrodes into the person's brain. This is done over, I think, the course of a day. Each electrode has however many little filaments on it, and will randomly get some neurons. And then they then probe the neurons. So in the morning, they'd show the person thousands of pictures and record the neuron activities of, say, 100 neurons or something, in response to all these pictures. And then they sit down over lunch. And because obviously you don't want to leave people walking around with like their skull open for longer than necessary. And this has been done already for their pre-surgical mapping. Then they look at the images and they say, now what is it? First of all, are there any neurons that seem to have some sort of systematic reaction at all to any of these images? And most don't, but some do. And then they say, well, okay, what they found in this particular subject, this is one person, these are firing rates of neurons in response to the image. They found that this person's neuron, one of these person's neurons, reacted to pictures of Jennifer Aniston, right? And they thought, what is it? What is it about Jennifer Aniston? Is it that she's blonde? Is it that she's American? Is it that she's, an actress? Is it that she's a woman? Is it that she was, people who've been married to Brad Pitt, etc. They tried, because over lunch they collected all these other images and tried to work out what exactly was the sensitivity of this neuron, because it appeared to be only sensitive to Jennifer Aniston, and their end conclusion was it's only sensitive to Jennifer Aniston. It's not sensitive to actresses and blonde people and yada, yada, yada. And they also found, I think, a Halle Berry one and a one that reacted to, it was really weird, to, is it Baha'i? I don't know how you pronounce it. There's some, I think it's an Indian religion called Baha'i or something. Baha'i temples or the Bay Bridge. There was one neuron that reacted to just those two things. So just, the reason I put up this slide is because we've got absolutely no idea what's going on down at the neuron level. Is it, can you see it?
85.
85, is it? Is it? Maybe it is, okay. I don't know. So this was, we really are very far from understanding, at the neuron level, this works really badly because you only got somebody for a day for very good reasons. And also it's kind of random. It's kind of random what pictures you show them, in some way arbitrary. And every time you stick a neuron, if you had the same person on 2 different days, you wouldn't actually get the same neurons with your electrodes, right? And then what we're actually seeing with fMRI are collections of hundreds of millions of neurons. So the short answer is we don't know how far we'll be able to dig down. We don't have a good handle on how different the information we're getting at the voxel level is from what's going on down below. But I mean, okay, ultimately, since if you believe that all of your mind is encoded in your brain, then if we could one day record all neurons, then we could do it perfectly, right? But
no, I mean, so I think that, from what you're saying, I think even if you could record all neurons perfectly, my conjecture is that you wouldn't be able to predict well, because I think there's a distinction between the causal relationship of a word with your reading and the real, just what you're able to measure. Like when you say stadium, the person is automatically thinking lights, sound, sport, and all these other things, and you don't really understand what's causing the thing. So even if you could measure it perfectly without noise, over several experiments, whatever, even if you could do that, you still don't know what's really causing it.
yeah, I mean, ideally what you'd like to be able to do is record all the neurons, which we can't do, in kind of all possible contexts.
Yeah. Okay.
So you'd like to have, the same person over, because, okay, I'm assuming that there's something in common between what you know about stadiums now and in 1 week, and what you think about stadiums when you see a picture of a stadium and you read the word stadium or you go to the stadium. I'm just assuming that.
Okay,
and so if you were able to record this,
in all these contexts,
is it all these different contexts, and then
as you said, vary the things that are associated with light and sound and all these things, and hopefully subtract those out. And
something like
you
that,
get
exactly.
Only what a stadium causes.
Yeah, that's what we would. If we could record all the neurons, the other problem is if we could record all the neurons, we couldn't process all the data because there'd be too much of it. But anyway, that'll be something maybe we can do in 30 years or something. Yeah. Okay.